So what are nanobots and how will they potentially help us defy death and how much longer could they make us live for?
Well, disease and illness are caused largely by damage at the molecular and the cellular level. Today's medical technology is very large on this scale. The finest surgeon's scalpel is more suited to rip and tear than it is to heal and cure. Now, if we had tools that were molecular, both in their size and their precision, that we could intervene at the cellular and the molecular level, and we could cure disease at the fundamental level. And that's what medical nanorobots or nanobots are going to be able to do in the future. So that's the basic idea. Very small, very precise, and very intelligent. They're under computer control, so they can intervene and carry out surgical procedures in a way that today's surgeons can't because their tools are simply too big and too imprecise.
And how small are we talking? Are there any comparisons to the
Really,
size?
really small. I mean, we're talking down at the scale of not many atoms. Atoms,
Wow.
an atom is smaller than a nanometer. And to give you a feeling for it, my arm is about a meter in length. 1,000 times smaller than my arm is a millimeter. And 1,000 times smaller than that is a micrometer. And 1,000 times smaller than that is a nanometer. And atoms are
Wow.
a
Wow.
little bit smaller than a nanometer. So they're really, really, really tiny. And if you want to think
And
about it, atoms are sort of the Lego blocks that nature uses to build really small molecular machines. So really small, that's the scale.
if they're that small, how are humans able to create them then?
Well, we don't exactly create them, but we use them. I mean, imagine, like I said, suppose you've got a Lego set that's really, really small, and you're able to sort of assemble them and reassemble them. Now, chemists are very familiar with atoms and molecules because chemists assemble atoms in very precise arrangements all the time. Now, chemists have a hard time scaling up. From the chemist's
Mm.
point of view, the challenge is not how do you arrange atoms precisely. The problem from the chemist's point of view is how do you make really big structures where every atom is in the right place. So chemists can make tens and hundreds and thousands and even tens of thousands of atoms that are very precise. But when you get larger, well, there are a few things. DNA, for example, is very large, but it's a very specific structure. If you want to arrange things where every atom is in the right place, and this gets into a very famous talk by Feynman in 1959, where he said he wanted to arrange the atoms the way he wanted. And that was sort of the first hint that perhaps we could arrange atoms in most of the ways permitted by physical law if we had the tools to do that. So that's sort of a
And
general idea.
yeah. And what do we want them what do we want to arrange them into to be able to help our bodies? Let's say a blood vessel was damaged or something. How would arranging them into a certain order help it repair that?
Well, if you have a blocked circulatory system, so your blood vessel is jammed up, what you'd like to do is clear it out, sort of like roto-rooter. So if you had a very small medical nanodevice, and at this point, I'd be talking about a micron in size. So a micron is big on the scale of atoms, but it's still very small compared with the size of you and me. But if you had a micron size medical nanodevice, and this micron-sized medical nanodevice was built with every atom in the right place, then it could do things like remove the blockage in the circulatory system and do so with very great precision. And after clearing out the blockage, you then have a circulatory system that was now clear. And when you remove it, people imagine that you just gouge it out and remove it. You'd want to be able to remove the material that was blocking it and sort of hold on to it rather than let it float freely and cause other problems in the circulatory system. So there are various ways of doing that, but it would be a way of doing it that was very neat and tidy, I suppose would be the way of expressing.
Yeah. And I assume it's not just going to be a one size fits all nanobot. Is there going to be very specific nanobots for specific diseases and problems, right?
There are a lot of different proposals. I think one of my favorites is the respirocyte. Now, we all know that we breathe. I breathe in, I breathe out. And when I breathe in, the oxygen enters my lungs, and then it flows through my circulatory system, and oxygen reaches my tissues, and that's good. Now, there are conditions where I don't get as much oxygen as I should. Perhaps the most dramatic is if I have a heart attack and my heart stops pumping blood, and then, of course, that's very bad. One of the proposals is for a respirocyte. Now, a respirocyte is conceptually very simple. It's a high-pressure tank. It would store oxygen at perhaps 1,000 atmospheres. And this high-pressure tank might be a micron in size, and you'd inject a therapeutic dose of them, so there'd be a large number of them floating around in your circulatory system, and they would release oxygen into the tissues. So they'd release just a little bit, and when they passed through the lungs, they'd absorb oxygen, and when they entered the tissues, they'd release oxygen. So they'd have to be able to measure the partial pressure of oxygen in the tissues, and of course in the lungs there's a high partial pressure of oxygen. So they'd absorb oxygen, and in the tissues there's a lower partial pressure of oxygen, so they'd release oxygen to bring up the partial pressure of oxygen. Now, what's interesting is that these respirocytes could store enough oxygen to keep you oxygenated for many hours. So if you had a full therapeutic dose of respirocytes, you could do some things that were kind of interesting. For example, you could have this dose of respirocytes, and then you could essentially go scuba diving. In other words,
Wow.
instead of having a single big tank of oxygen on your back, you have teeny tiny distributed scuba tanks all throughout your circulatory system. So when you go underwater, they would provide you with oxygen. And you could just swim underwater, and there you'd be. You could go to the bottom of the swimming pool and just sit there going hum-de-hum-de-hum. Here I am at the bottom of the swimming pool, having a good time, enjoying myself. And you could just sit there for an hour. Then you could come up, and then the little respirocytes would be, they'd run out of oxygen after a while, but then they could refill if you started breathing again. Now, that's not a very, how shall I put it, incredibly valuable scenario. I mean, sitting at the bottom of the pool for an hour is perhaps not the most wonderful way to spend your time. But now think of another scenario. Suppose you're at risk for a heart attack. And now suppose that you're going about your life and suddenly you have a heart attack. Now, normally, if you have a heart attack, you're not able to do much. You have a heart attack, you realize you're having a heart attack, and you fall over. If you had a dose of respirocytes, your first response would be, oh, my heart has stopped. But if you have respirocytes, throughout your circulatory system, they would still be delivering oxygen to your tissues. So your response would be, oh, my heart has stopped. I wonder what I should do. And even though your circulation had stopped, you would still be getting oxygen. Your tissues would still be oxygenated. And your first response might be to get out your cell phone and call your doctor and say, Doc, my heart has stopped. What should I do? And your doctor, of course, would say, look, you've only got an hour. You better get down to the emergency room. And you say, oh, okay, I'll go to the emergency room. And you go to the emergency room and you walk in and you say, hey, my heart has stopped. Now, the first couple of times this happens, the people in the emergency room are going to say, what? How can your heart be stopped and you're still walking around? And you say, well, I got these respirocytes and they're providing oxygen. And the emergency room techs talk with your doctor and say, what's going on here? And then they say, okay, we got to treat you real fast. This is very different from you have a heart attack, you fall over, and unless you're real lucky, you die. Very different scenario. So now suddenly we've shifted what happens. We've given you an hour in which to respond because you've got this dose of respirocytes in your circulatory system. So that's one scenario that might happen in the future once we have a particular class of medical nanobots called respirocytes. And there are articles on respirocytes to discuss how they work and what's going on and what the technical issues are. But we don't have them today. We want to have them. And I think it would be really useful if we developed them, for example, before your listeners developed heart attacks. I mean, just think about it. Wouldn't it be nice to develop this in, say, 10 or 20 years before people had heart attacks and before the people listening had heart attacks? That would be nice.
Be very helpful.
Very helpful. Yes, exactly. So that's one of the things on the horizon.
Yeah. And is there going to be almost these endogenous health data collection nanobots in your body that can tell you on your phone, for example, the exact levels of zinc in your body, the exact levels of your heart rate variability, you know, because we have these Fitbits and Whoop straps on our wrists in the modern day, but could nanotechnology allow us it to be inside of our body and acutely, like, super accurate and help us detect problems with our health and our bodies way before a doctor or a Fitbit could?
At some point, yes, they would be. At some point, I expect they would be indwelling. Initially, I think they'll go in, they'll do whatever they do, and they'll get out. I mean, the first obvious thing to do is have some medical nanorobots go in and do diagnostics. They'd look for problems and they'd identify problems. So you'd go to a clinic, you'd have an injection of medical nanorobots, they would inspect, and they'd say, hey, you know, we see a very early stage cancer, or we see some issues in your circulatory system. There's some stuff here that you might not pick up with our existing medical imaging capabilities. There's things you can find that would be very early stage. So to be part of sort of a routine medical exam, and that would be the early model. It goes in, it does its thing, it gets out. And then you might have the next stage would be it goes in, it does some procedure. It clears out circulatory system, it deals with a problem, it gets out. And then later you might move on to something that stays in for a while. So I expect there'll be a gradual progression. We won't have indwelling medical nanorobots for a while. We'll go slowly. But at some point, we'll have indwelling medical nanorobots that will be monitoring your tissue to make sure everything is okay.
Yeah. And how is there a possibility of our immune system fighting these nanobots once they get into our
Oh,
body,
yeah.
or are they?
That's
How is
a
that going to be
definite
mitigated?
concern. And so one of the things you have to be careful about is designing these devices so that they don't arouse the attention of your immune system. So you have to make sure that they have surfaces that are benign, that don't cause problems. So that's going to be a big issue in the design of these systems. And we have a bit of a leg up because it turns out that a diamond surface, a smooth diamond surface, seems to be not very irritating to the immune system. But the fact of the matter is we need to proceed in a very careful way to assess exactly what's going on. And there's been some research in this area to assess what the biocompatibility of small atomically precise diamondoid structures might be. But that's a very great concern. And I think that's one of the things that is going to be obviously the object of a lot of research once you're able to build devices that are small, atomically precise, and intended to help in terms of medical capabilities.
And what chemicals are the nanobots likely going to be made of? Is it going to be very complex compounds or much more, basic chemicals?
Well, right now people are looking at diamond or variants of diamond. So lonsdaleite, diamond, graphene, graphitic structures, things of that nature, basically because they're very strong. For example, the respirosite. The respirosite, if it's going to be a tank that holds compressed oxygen, you would want the walls of that tank to be very strong and very light. And obviously, you'd want them to be impervious to compressed oxygen. And at 1,000 atmospheres, oxygen is able to slip through a lot of biological materials. So you need something that is, very, very impenetrable to high pressure gases like oxygen. And diamond looks like it fits the bill. So you could design something, you could design a strong, lightweight tank that would be able to hold the compressed oxygen and do so with large safety margins. And you would prefer these tanks not to explode in the middle of your body. You would like to keep that to a minimum. So over designing the tank so that it has a lot of spare strength would be one of the things you'd like to do.
And if we take this mini oxygen tank as an example, what machine or technology would be used to create these nanobots? Would it be like 3D printing?
Well,
How
if
would
you
that work?
look at diamond and you ask, how do you make diamond? Diamond today can be made by a number of processes. And if you ask which one of these processes might we use to build atomically precise diamond, in other words, not only do we want to make diamond, we want to sculpt it. We want to get every atom in the right place. We want to provide a surface where the surface is exactly what we want. And we want to put atoms on the surface, oxygen or nitrogen, that are just exactly the right, because we want to passivate the surface in just the right ways. So if you want to do that, then you start looking at chemical vapor deposition. This is a process that's used today to grow diamond, but it's random. In other words, you have a diamond surface under a gas, a very reactive gas, and it grows because there are radicals, very reactive small bits of molecules that when they bounce into something react with it. Now, if you think about that kind of chemistry, that chemistry works to grow diamond, but it works at random because these small molecules bounce around in the gas and they hit the growing diamond surface at random. But if you use that as an idea for how it is you could grow it, you can then think about molecular tools, which is a long way of saying Well, you and I have hands, and we build things by picking up tools and using those tools to build things with our hands. We use positionally controlled tools. We can use this same concept at the molecular scale to pick up molecular tools and build molecular structures. In other words, I was talking about atoms as nature's Lego blocks. Imagine if you had molecular tools that could pick up atoms and molecules and snap them together like very small Lego blocks. That's essentially what we're talking about. And I apologize to the chemists in the audience who are cringing, but there are articles describing exactly what the molecular tools look like and exactly what the reactions are. So go off and look at the articles on mechanosynthesis, and you'll see what the proposals are and what they look like and how it work.
Yeah. And you spoke about the scuba diving thing. And I was thinking before this conversation, I wonder if there will be some more or some ways that it isn't just used for purely diagnosis and curing purposes. What are some other examples of some potential enhancements it could do for the human body and the human brain?
Well,
hey guys, first of all, I want to say thank you. There's one person who's been sharing the podcast more than anybody else, and that is you. The only reason why this podcast continues to grow is because you are sharing it. And my only ask is, if this podcast has provided value to you, or you think it'll provide value to somebody else, then if you could send them a DM of the link or a screenshot to the show, that would genuinely make my day. And it's the only way the podcast will continue to grow. That's my only ask of you. Thank you very much.
The obvious enhancement is I would like to live a longer life. One of the things you observe is that there's something called the Gompertz curve. And the Gompertz curve says when you're young, you're healthy, and your annual mortality risk is very low. As you get older, your mortality risk goes up and up and up and up. And in fact, the Gompertz curve can be summarized as every 8 years, your mortality risk, your annual mortality risk doubles. So, So when you're 10 years old, your mortality risk is at its minimum. When you're 10 years old, you have a mortality risk that's 1 in 10,000 per year, which is really low. I mean, it's quite remarkable. Now, if we could keep your biological molecular machinery working as well as it did when you were 10 years old, you'd have a lifespan quite literally of thousands of years. So what we would like to do, and what seems to be possible in, a theoretical sense, is to get your biological molecular machinery in as good a working order as when you were 10 years old. And then at that point, you should have a lifespan of thousands of years. So that's sort of the goal. And then how do you do that? Well, if you have medical nanorobots that can go in at the molecular and cellular level, then anything which is not working correctly should be repairable. Whether that's your DNA, your genes, whether that's other structures, other molecular or cellular structures, it should be possible to repair those. Now, there's a lot of work going on today, figuring out how to repair things, and people are talking about picking up 10, 20, 50 years so that we can live longer. But keep in mind, 10-year-old children have an annual mortality risk of 1 in 10,000. Think of Elliot in E.T. He was 10 years old. If he could stay healthy as he was at 10, he would live a really long time. So that's sort of an ambition. That's a goal. That's a vision sort of shimmering on the horizon that seems attainable once we know enough, once we learn enough, once we are knowledgeable enough about both the molecular machinery of the human body and knowledgeable enough about medical nanodevices so we can actually do something at the scale and with the precision needed to actually intervene and repair the biological medical machinery, the biological systems of our body. So that's sort of the goal.
And why do we age? Why do we get worse at repairing our bodies as time progresses? What are some of the reasons for aging?
Well, if you ask me that question, my first response is everything in biology only makes sense in light of evolution. So the question then becomes, from an evolutionary perspective, what is going on with aging? And to first order, the answer is simple. If you're a field mouse running around and foxes can eat you and hawks can eat you and you get killed off, within a few years, you're going to die because something eats you. So if you're a field mouse, there's no value in being a really long-lived field mouse. If you're a field mouse and you could live 20 years, what's the point? Because you're going to be eaten in a year or two. So from evolution's point of view, the purpose of all the biological molecular machinery in a field mouse is to keep you healthy for a few years so you can have more field mice children, and then that's enough. After that, who cares? You're going to have been eaten. So evolution tunes up the biological molecular machinery of a field mouse so it's good enough to last a few years, and then after that, it doesn't matter. So that's what evolution does. On the other hand, suppose you're a bird and you live in a nest way up on the cliff and the predators can't get you and you're safe and you fly through the air. You can have a lifespan of decades because nothing can get you. You're pretty safe. And that's what we see in nature. We see in nature that organisms that are safe against predation, that are safe against sort of the normal accidents, can have very long lifespans. Redwood trees, large redwood trees, can live for a very long time, thousands of years. But organisms that are predated and have short lifespans in the wild, they don't live very long even in the lab because they don't need to. So what's going on in humans, the reason we grow old is that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, we didn't live that long. If we made it to 30, we were really lucky. And if you look at the mortality curves, you find that, yeah, we have a pretty good chance of making it to 30. And then after that, things start to fall apart. It's kind of risks go up and up and up, and the Gompertz curve starts to get you. So up until 30, we're in pretty good shape. And after that, things start to not be so great in terms of our risk of mortality.
And
So that's the short answer.
yeah, no, it makes sense. And are we just at the tip of this iceberg in terms of how much we know and how much we can do with nanotechnology, and what's the timeline in your view for the advancements in this field?
Well, the correct scientific answer is I don't know.
Yeah, of course.
But having said that, you can look at the advances in, for example, computer technology. Moore's law has been going pretty good for a while. And what you see is that we're seeing exponential trends. If you plot the trends on semi-log paper, they form straight lines. Now, the purists who are listening will say, well, it's not an exponential, it's a double exponential. So, okay, there are nitpickers, but to first approximation, there are some things that you can plot on semi-log paper, and they're reasonably approximated by straight lines. So, for example, the computer power per dollar has been looking like a straight line for a long time. It's not exactly a straight line, but, close enough. And there are other things. There's the cost of communications. There's computational power, storage, information cost of storing bits, communications, things related to information, sequencing of the human genome, sequencing of DNA. That's been also on an exponential curve, even falling very rapidly. So you see a bunch of revolutions that are going on these sort of straight lines on semilog paper. And if you plot them out, you start to see interesting things happening in the future. Now, there's no guarantee that these straight lines continue. They might pause, they might accelerate, who knows? But the trend lines have been, a number of those trend lines have been steady for a while. There's another embarrassing trend. If you look at computers, there's another embarrassing trend line, which is the cost of fabs. And the cost of fabs has been going up exponentially over time. So I forget how many billions of dollars they're up to. I think it's a few tens of billions of dollars for a fab.
What is a fab?
A fab is a semiconductor fabrication facility, and it's what you need to build if you want to build computer chips. So computer chips are now being built, I think they're about down to one company, maybe two or three. TSMC is making the most advanced fabs in the world, and I think Samsung and Intel are chasing them and are very close. I might be a little bit off, but it used to be there were a dozen companies that were making fabs, and then gradually the different companies would drop out. We're now down to 1, 2, 3 companies because it's just so expensive. And we're going to reach one company shortly. And then what happens after that? I mean, do we build the $100 billion fab, the $1 trillion fab? I mean, at some point the economics are going to be kind of difficult. And then we have to start thinking about, well, what do we do after the fabs are too expensive to build? Is there some other way of manufacturing things which isn't so expensive? Oh, gee, that sounds like a lead in to molecular manufacturing. Huh, amazing. Yes, there is a way of manufacturing things which is very precise and very low cost and doesn't involve multi-billion-dollar fab facilities, so it's not as capital intensive. We could talk about that if you want to.
Yeah, no, tell me about molecular manufacturing.
So molecular manufacturing is the idea that you could build things by positioning individual atoms or individual groups of atoms and build up a structure by sort of additive. It's called additive synthesis, if you want the fancy way of doing it. But it's sort of snapping Lego blocks together. So if you want to build something, you take your Lego blocks and you snap them together and you build what you want to do, 1 or 2 Lego blocks at a time. And that's what you can do if you're building things out of atoms. And we're actually able to do that to some extent. Scanning probe microscopes are able to arrange atoms. And mostly today, they arrange atoms on surfaces, but it's pretty obvious that you can arrange atoms in 3 dimensions with scanning probe microscopes, although we're only just barely beginning to enter that era. And we're only beginning to figure out how to build 3-dimensional structures with scanning probe microscopes. But once you can build 3-dimensional structures with scanning probe microscopes, then you can start to build, 3-dimensional structures, which would be very, very small molecular machines. So the kind of things you see around us, whether it's robotic arms or whether it's electrical devices, you can start building them on the very small scale. And of course, the computer industry is interested in doing this. And if the computer industry is willing to blow, $40 billion on a fab or $20 billion or whatever the number is, then you can imagine that they would be perfectly happy to build some other manufacturing technology if only they could figure out what it was. And at some point, you can definitely assume that they will figure out anything that it's possible to figure out because there's a lot of money at stake.
Mm. And is molecular manufacturing just applicable to computers, or is it also applicable to everyday products as well?
Well, once you can build once you can build computers that are atomically precise, you should be able to build other things that are atomically precise, like medical nanodevices. And you should also be able to build things like diamond, which is if you make atomically precise diamond, you can start to make things that are shatterproof diamond. So we have glass, which shatters. We also have fiberglass, which does not shatter. So you can imagine variants of diamond which are as strong as diamond, have the strength, but don't have the property of shattering. So they're resistant to that. So at that point, you can start to say things like, gee, what would happen if we had really powerful computers? And you can you can do an analysis of the kind of computational power you get. And we've actually done and published papers that discuss how many more magnitudes of computational power we'll get if we have molecular computers. And it's quite impressive. Uh, and then you can say things like, well, could you build stronger materials? So diamond is very light and very strong. And if you start to have that light, strong material, and then if you can build it inexpensively, then you can start to say things like, well, you could have a big impact on the aerospace industry. Because if you can have something that is lighter and stronger than the standard aerospace materials, and you can get it inexpensively, and you can shape it in precisely the way you want, then you can have a revolution in all of the aerospace industries, rockets, airplanes, all of those things. So you have a big impact across the board.
It seems like there's all these different industries and emerging fields like aerospace and cryopreservation and molecular manufacturing and many others, artificial intelligence, they're all kind of converging. And it seems if there's one major breakthrough in one of those industries or the right field, would that cause a snowball or domino effect on the other ones? Is that your prediction?
Well, essentially, all of them benefit from the ability to arrange atoms at the molecular scale with great precision on a large scale. So, I mean, Feynman was talking about this in 1959. He had a very famous essay called There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom. By the way, if anyone's listening and they want a fun read, go look up There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom by Feynman and read it because it's a famous essay and it's just fantastic because everyone in the physics community knows about it and it always spices up. If you ever write any articles or talk with people, you can just drop this in and say, well, Feynman said, and then everyone goes, ooh, what a learned and knowledgeable person that is. He referred to Feynman. And it makes all physicists go all warm and gushy because all physicists love Feynman. He's just, one of the sort of the rock stars in the physics. So it's really good, but go and read it. It's a fun read. It's very enjoyable, and it's one of sort of the famous sort of essays about, yes, we ought to be able to arrange atoms in most of the ways permitted by physical law. At some point, I mean, it looks like it's in the cards, and then you have discussions of how we do it and when it's going to happen, and how do you get there, and what's the process. But the vision is pretty clear, I think, at this point.
Yeah, which is super exciting, really exciting.
Oh yeah.
And what's the difference between clinical death and information death, and why is it important to distinguish the two of those?
Well, I was thinking about that back in the 1980s. I was, I gotten married and had a career, and we'd bought a house, and everything was going along swimmingly. And I was thinking, okay, things are wonderful. What's the next big event in life? You know, and there are not all that many big events in life. You know, you're born, you get married. Oh yeah, there's this thing called a funeral, you know. And so I was thinking about the next big event in life, and I was saying, huh, you know, in this modern day and age of the 1980s, is there an alternative? You know, there's some other option that I could figure out, you know? So I started thinking about it. And, you know, if you're in the research game, the first thing you learn is that you got to define your problem, and you got to define it correctly. Because if you mess up on the definition, it's over. If you define the problem wrong, forget it. You'll never solve it. So I spent, I don't know, over 6 months, just thinking about what it was that I was trying to do. Because I'd gotten sort of the initial concept. My initial thought was, you know, death is bad. That was my initial thought. You know, it's just not a good thing. By the way, there's a lot of controversy about this point. There are a lot of people that, I mean, it's fascinating. A lot of people think, you know, death gives meaning to life. Death is, you know, it's wonderful. Shirley MacLaine has said all her friends who have died think it's the greatest thing. So she's looking forward to it, you know. So there's a lot of discussion about, is death good or bad, and what do we do about it? My take on it is death is bad. And I realize this is a controversial position, but I will stick to my guns on this. I think, you know, I would prefer not dying over dying. I think,
Yeah, same.
very, very, very simple. But at any rate, you know, that I concluded that death is bad. And then the next question that comes along is, what do you mean by death? What is this thing called death? And then like I say, I spent a good 6 months thinking about it. And then I came to the conclusion, well, death is, well, the dictionary definition is death is a permanent cessation of vital functions. And permanent means permanent. So, you know, and there are a lot of people who talk about, well, he came back from the dead and so forth. But that's really just sort of the headline grabbing stuff. That's clickbait. Really, death is meant to be a permanent cessation. It's over. And when you reach the point where it's over, then you say they're dead. And if it's not over, they're not dead. I mean, you know, the famous Mark Twain sort of discussion of, you know, the rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated, you know, that kind of thing. So if someone greets you on the street and you say, wait a minute, I thought you were dead. And they say, no, as you can see, I'm alive and healthy. It's the case that if someone greets you and says they're alive and healthy, it's evident that they weren't dead, that was a misdiagnosis. So that's sort of the philosophical issue of life and death. So by the same token, if it's possible to restore you to good health, if it's possible in principle to restore you to good health, then you're not dead. And so that brought me to what's been called the information theoretic definition of death. And I published it and said, hey, this looks like it's the definition of death, which is based on a theoretical understanding. And what it says is that if your structures, if the structures in your brain, the neuronal structures that encode your personality and your memories have been so damaged that it is impossible in principle to restore you to good health, then you're dead. But if it's possible in principle to restore you to good health, you're not dead. You have not suffered information theoretic death. And the focus there is, have the structures been so damaged that it's impossible in principle And of course, this immediately says that, you know, if you can prevent damage to the structures, then you can prevent information theoretic death. Now, this, of course, is in contrast to the typical definitions of death. The typical definition of death is, well, nothing we do is going to work, so we should give up. And if you look at it, the medical profession has a very operational definition of death. And the operational definition is, here is a set of symptoms. Here's a set of symptoms which are resistant to treatment by any procedure that is available to me. And from a doctor's point of view, that's a very reasonable definition. If there's nothing I can do, then I will announce that the patient is dead. And in a military situation, this is known as triage. And if there's nothing you can do, then, hey, pull a sheet over the patient and turn to the next patient. But that's an operational definition. That's not a definition that has any theoretical underpinning. And if you look, the definitions of death that are in use are in fact operational definitions. They don't have a theoretical underpinning. They are based on the observation that the set of symptoms that are observed are resistant to treatment. And as a consequence, you conclude that the understanding of the theoretical basis of death is missing. Now, in most cases, this doesn't matter. I mean, if you've got a patient who is resistant to treatment by everything you've got available, then, okay, there's nothing you have available that you can do. But if you're talking about cryonics, you're talking about cryopreservation, then you cryopreserve them. And now you have the opportunity to use medical technology of 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 500 years in the future to revive that patient. So in that case, you have to ask yourself, what medical technologies might be available in the future that could revive this patient? So in that case, you're no longer asking the question, what are the current technologies available? You're no longer asking the pragmatic, what are the symptoms that are resistant to treatment with current technology? You're asking the question, what is the fundamental limit of medical technology? And in that case, you have to ask the question, what is the theoretical definition of death? And in fact, I mean, we're beginning to see medicine today beginning to observe this more fundamental definition, because we're seeing advances in medicine constantly cause changes in the definition of death. Because if you operate pragmatically on what are a set of symptoms resistant to treatment, and then you observe that that pragmatic definition keeps changing as the medical technology changes, then you start to say, hey, wait a minute, we keep changing the definition of the set of symptoms that are resistant to treatment, because as we get better and better, we can treat more and more symptoms. And that's what's going on in medicine today. Doctors are saying, hey, wait a minute, we can treat patients today that we couldn't treat 10, 20 years ago. And they're beginning to look at it and say, we're seeing this sliding scale. What are we sliding into? And they're beginning to realize that there's got to be some limit. And so empirically, they're saying, wait a minute, there's got to be a limit here. And so they're beginning to say, isn't there a limit? And so they're approaching this concept of information theoretic death by observing that their definitions, their changing definitions, seem to be approaching a limit. And that's also occurring at the same time. So it's kind of fascinating watching these definitions of death change. But once you accept the idea that To be dead is to be permanently unable to revive a person. Then you start to ask fundamental questions like, what will medical technology be able to do 100 years from now? What are the possibilities? What are the capabilities? And then you get a strong interest in what will nanomedicine be able to do 100 years from now, 200 years from now? What are the limits of medical technology? And then you begin to realize that cryopreservation should work. I mean, it does not look like cryopreservation is causing information theoretic death. And as a consequence, if you wait long enough for the medical nanotechnology to be developed, then at some point it should be able to restore good health. By which I mean it should be able to restore the physical structures that are encoding your memory and personality, and restore those physical structures to a fully operational and healthy state. And at that point, you wake up and you say, hey, I'm alive, I'm awake. How did that happen? Good heavens. I get to see the future.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
it's amazing. And
that sounds good.
yeah, sounds better than the alternative we currently have, doesn't it?
It does. Not everyone agrees with that, by the way, but you know, for those of us who think being alive is good, then hey, you know, this looks like a good deal.
Why do people want to die or accept death? Why don't they want to defy death, even if the technology is available?
Well, there you got me. I don't understand. I just don't. People, I think it's habit, but maybe I'm wrong, because we have lived, I mean, for, you know, millions of years, we've lived with the inevitability of dying at some point. So this opportunity is something which is really quite remarkable. And really, it's this generation which is finally being given this option. And changing how we think about things, I mean, changing how we think is difficult. It's a long ingrained habit that of course we're going to die, of course we're going to grow old, of course aging is inevitable. But it's not. It's only inevitable with a given level of technology. As our technology gets better, we're able to extend lifespan. I mean, right now we live much longer and much healthier lives than we did in centuries past. You can just look at the mortality curves from a few centuries ago or 1,000 years ago, and we live longer, healthier lives. It's simply a fact. And looking forward, we see that we're going to be living longer and healthier lives in the future. So the question is, how far can this trend go? And as I pointed out, a 10-year-old child, if you can maintain the health that you have as a 10-year-old child, then you should be able to live thousands of years. Now, that's going to require very advanced medical technology. And I think it will, I'm not certain, but I think it will require a nanomedicine. I think it will require a medical technology that fully uses medical nanotechnology and uses the ability to build medical nanorobots. But I think it's feasible, and I think we're going to get there. And if we can buy a few more decades, by whatever means, I think we'll be able to benefit from that. So that's where we are right now. And we're seeing people beginning to understand that, oh yeah, I might benefit. I mean, life extension has gotten more adherence. More people are saying, yeah, I'd like to live longer. I'd like to, you know, exercise and take various medications that could extend my lifespan. I'd like to look after my health. And then some of the people who are doing that are saying, yeah, well, why don't I look into cryonics? And the way of thinking about cryonics is very, very simple. Each year, you have some risk of mortality. In other words, the Gompertz curve, if you look at it, specifies your annual mortality risk to a first approximation. Everyone likes to think they're going to be better than the Gompertz curve, that their annual risk of mortality is lower than the average. Okay, so your mortality risk is lower than the average, but it's not an order of magnitude lower than the average.
Yeah.
Right? So your mortality risk is going up with age. So this whole idea of, dealing with the risk of mortality, you've got a risk of mortality this year, and it's going to go up next year, and it's going to go up the year after that. And until we actually manage to get all of these medical technologies in place that reduce your annual risk of mortality, what everyone today is facing is an increasing annual risk of mortality. Now, if you want to take care of this year and next year's and the next, I don't know, it looks like the next 5 or 10 years, it looks like the mortality risk is already there. If you want to address that risk, there's one option on the table, and that option is cryonics. Because if you have a heart attack or you have cancer or you have an automobile accident or whatever it is, there's one option on the table, and that option is cryonics. And then the question is, do you want to take advantage of that option or not? And there's a very simple way of thinking about it. Either you sign up for cryonics or you don't, and either it works or it doesn't. So that's a payoff matrix with 4 outcomes. And there's some probability that it works. Now, you have to think about it for yourself to decide what value you place in the 4 outcomes. Different people will assign different values to the 4 outcomes. And to sign up for cryonics, you got to get a life insurance policy. That's the typical way of doing it. So you say, well, the life insurance policy costs money. What's the cost of the life insurance policy? What's the value I place on my life? Stuff like that. And then you have to decide, hey, what are the odds this is going to work? Is it 1 in 1,000, 1 in a million, 1 in 10, 5 in 10? I think the odds are pretty good. My claim is I think cryonics should work, and we can talk about what I mean by should. But I think cryonics should work because I think the current methods of cryopreservation do not cause information theoretic death, or should not cause information theoretic death. What do I mean by should?
What do you mean by should? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Your memories, your personality are in your brain, and they are stored in the structure of your brain. They're stored in the arrangement of your neurons. They're stored in the connections of the neurons. They're stored in the synapses. And if you look at what cryopreservation does, cryopreservation causes injury. People talk about cryopreservation injury. What is it that happens during cryopreservation? And if you look at what people, the neuroscience community has some fairly strong ideas about what long-term memory is, how it's stored, what it is, what are the mechanisms involved. And those strong opinions center around synapses and the structure of synapses. Synapses are fairly complicated. If you look at the molecular level, the synapse is gigantic. It's, on the order of a micron in size. There are thousands of synaptic proteins that are involved in the synapse. Those proteins don't go away if you cryopreserve someone. They're still there. They might not be in exactly functional status if you cryopreserve someone. So as you cool someone, the proteins that are involved in your body and your metabolism don't exactly function perfectly because of the lower temperature, because of the introduction of cryoprotectants for a variety of reasons. And also today, there's this whole nonsense about people are cryopreserved when they're legally dead. And this causes infinite confusion. Look, let's put it in small words. I want to live. If I go to my local hospital or my local doctor and say, will you cryopreserve me when I'm terminally ill? Their response is no, we won't. And they go, oh, well, I don't like that. Why won't you? And they say, we're not saying. We don't think it's good. It's not good. Well, why isn't it good? Well, we're not saying, and we're not going to talk about it. We don't like it. It's bad. Why is it bad? We don't want to talk about it. Oh, okay, you don't want to talk about it. It's bad, and you're not going to do anything. So I can't get cryopreserved if I go to a doctor or if I go to a hospital or if I go to the standard medical profession. They just won't do it. Okay, so I go to Alcor and I say, hey, Alcor, will you cryopreserve me? They say, sure. We got a whole we have a nonprofit that's set up to cryopreserve people. I say, oh, that's cool. How about I schedule it? If I'm terminally ill, can I schedule it? And Alcor said, well, no, because the law says you have to be legally dead to be cryopreserved. I go, oh, well, why do I have to be legally dead? Oh, well, if we cryopreserve you when you're legally alive, then after you're cryopreserved, you're legally dead, and they'll come and arrest us and throw us in jail. I go, oh, well, that doesn't sound good. So Alcor says we only cryopreserve people after someone else has declared them legally dead. And you can understand why, because Alcor doesn't want to have, the people get thrown in jail. And that's just the way the law works. And then until a doctor says, I will cryopreserve you and it's a medical treatment, until some hospital walks in and says, we are cryopreserving people and it's a medical treatment, and we're not transitioning people from legally alive to legally dead, I got to go with it. I have to say, yeah, okay, I'll pretend I'm legally dead to save my life. But between you, me, and the fence post, this is nonsense. I want to live. And the only way I can live is by pretending that I'm dead, which is weird, but there it is. Okay, if that's what I got to do to live, then that's what I'll do to live. I will say, sure, I'm dead. Yeah, if that's what you want me to do to live, I will pretend that I'm dead. Fine. Okay, you win. I will, but I'm not. I have not suffered information theoretic death. And furthermore, by the dictionary definition, if death is a permanent cessation of vital function, and I'm right, and this cryonics thing works, then I'll wake up in the future, and by the dictionary definition, I'm not dead, because there was no permanent cessation of vital function.
Yeah.
And it's even more interesting because when you look at the ethics, there's even ethics statements by the medical profession that say the terminally ill patient should be allowed to pursue any treatment that they wish, and they should be supported. So if I'm terminally ill and I want to be cryopreserved and that's my choice of treatment, I should be supported in that treatment. But I'm not. So we have the current rather curious situation where I have to announce that I'm legally dead and say, yes, I'm legally dead. And then Alcor can cryopreserve me because Alcor is cryopreserving me after I'm legally dead. And then the lawyers will, and the police will not come by and lock everyone up and throw them in jail for murder. And I have a shot at survival because I have not suffered information theoretic death, or I say that I don't think I suffered information theoretic death. So we have this very curious situation. And it confuses people immensely because, of course, if you suffered legal death, they say, well, but you're dead. You're legally dead. Yeah. Well, that's what we had to do to make this work, because otherwise they'd throw the team in jail. And then Alcor couldn't do its thing. And the doctors are refusing to cryopreserve me because they just won't. Because you go to a doctor and say, will you cryopreserve me if I'm terminally ill? And they say no. So, we have this.
Will that change?
Yeah, at some point. And there are a couple of reasons it might change. One is you just get enough people wanting to be cryopreserved that the hospital administrators say, oh, there's money to be made.
Yeah.
Hospital administrators they're fine. Hey, if there's money, that's fine by them. And then they'll tell the doctors, hey, doctors, go ahead and cryopreserve them. And then some hospital somewhere will do it because there are enough patients. But we don't have enough. I mean, we're not economically interesting to a hospital. You got to have a certain number of patients before a hospital is going to go into the business.
Yeah.
And frankly,
what will it take for that to be the case? How can more people be encouraged to be cryopreserved that want to?
What in fact is happening is Alcor is got surgeons who are medically trained. So I think what's happening is Alcor is just gearing up to have doctors carrying out the procedure. So I think at some point Alcor just says, hey, we'll do it. And we're doctors. And, I'm not exactly sure how the transition is going to take place. It might be that what happens is a hospital says, we will do it under the hospital's auspices, but we are subcontracting to Alcor. I don't know exactly how the transition takes place, but it's going to be an interesting legal dance. So the answer is I don't know exactly how the transition takes place, but clearly at some point you shift from a model where you're legally dead and you're cryopreserved to, oh, you're not legally dead, or maybe we get a third category. And there are a bunch of reasons why it might be easier to create a third category in law, because if you're cryopreserved, you're not going to be active for a long time.
Yeah.
So maybe we say, hey, there's living people who are running around and doing stuff. There are dead people who are, they've been cremated. And then there are cryopreserved people. And then we have rights for cryopreserved people that preserve their right to remain cryopreserved, for example.
Yeah. And
so
you have a good analogy that cryonically freezing someone is like turning off a computer rather than smashing it. Can you explain why this is the case and how our information is still preserved and what the process looks like when someone is cryopreserved?
So when someone is cryopreserved, you probably lose short-term memory. So short-term memory looks like it's, reverberating circuits, and that probably goes away. And then long-term memory is encoded in, and I'm just, quoting from sort of standard neuroscience. Long-term memory looks like it's encoded in changes in the synapses, and changes in the synapses don't go away. There's actually some interesting work on this. There are people who have actually studied the changes in synapses, and you can actually cryopreserve, I think it was nematodes, coelogams. You can actually cryopreserve simple organisms, very simple organisms, and then you can revive them and they retain the training. So we know that memories are retained in simple model organisms because you train them, cryopreserve them, revive them, and they retain the training. So because memory is fairly heavily conserved evolutionarily, you see the same mechanisms occurring. That gives us some reason to believe that the mechanisms involved in human memory are also likely to be conserved. We also believe that memory is conserved because if you think about the mechanisms involved in human memory, they're likely to be conserved. Also, there's some other arguments that can be applied. My daddy was a physicist, and it turns out that in physics, everything is conserved. In other words, the laws of physics are reversible, which means information is preserved full stop. Nothing is ever lost. Now, in physics, that's not entirely useful to us because in physics, sometimes the information is spread out across the universe. But it does mean that the laws of physics are reversible. And if you cryopreserve someone, then you're applying a set of reversible transformations, namely the laws of physics. And it occurred to me and actually I wrote an article on this back in 1994, it occurred to me that because the laws of physics are reversible, and because cryopreserving a person applies the laws of physics in the cryopreservation process, that cryopreservation is in fact a branch of cryptography, because cryptography is applying a set of reversible transformations with key material added, and then you take the encrypted result and try and figure out what the plain text message was. Well, what do you do in cryopreservation? Well, cryopreservation takes a person and it cryopreserves them. Well, the cryopreservation process involves the laws of physics, which are reversible. And then it mixes in thermal noise. So there's thermal noise. When you cryopreserve someone, you add thermal noise. So the key material is the thermal noise, and the laws of physics are the reversible transformation. And the enciphered result is the encrypted person, or the cryopreserved person. So a cryopreserved person in this description is the same as the encrypted result. The plain text is the information describing your personality, the personality relevant information. And the key material is the thermal noise that's added in during the cryopreservation process. So the purpose of revival is to determine the plain text information, which is the personality relevant information. And you can recover that information. Obviously, if you can recover the key material, you can do that. You could also recover the plain text information without recovering all of the key material. So you don't need all of the thermal noise. You don't need to know all of the information about the thermal noise to recover the plain text information. So essentially what you've got is an encryption problem. You want to decrypt the encrypted cryopreserved person to determine the plain text or the person prior to cryopreservation. Now, what's interesting about this is it's literally true. I mean, I'm not talking metaphorically or anything like that. I'm talking, it is literally the case that cryopreservation involves reversible transformations, which are the laws of physics. It's literally the case that you're mixing in random noise, which is the key material. It's literally the case that the cryopreserved person is the encrypted text, and you can treat the cryopreserved person as such, and you can apply standard cryptanalytic techniques to determine the plain text or the person before the personality relevant information prior to the cryopreservation. So I do this in a paper in 1994. There's some techniques that are used to determine the wiring in World War II rotor machines. And I just walk through and show how the math, which is applied to determine the wiring in World War II rotor machines, is applicable to determining the neuronal connections in a cryopreserved person after they've been cryopreserved, and to recover the pre-cryopreservation wiring. And it's very simple. It's using maximum likelihood estimation to determine the appropriate wiring, and it's using the redundancy inherent in the human brain to determine what the correct wiring is. And that's what it is. Now, one of the fascinating things about cryptography is everybody thinks that their latest encryption is unbreakable. So the Caesar's cipher used in Caesar's time was unbreakable until it was broken. And then the Vignere, which was an improvement on the Caesar cipher, was unbreakable until it was broken. And then the Playfair, which was an improvement on that, was unbreakable until it was broken. And then the Enigma was unbreakable until it was broken, and so forth and so on. So you just see time after time after time, people think that the latest whiz-bang encryption algorithm is unbreakable, and then, oops, it gets broken. So you see a pattern here. And the pattern is people run around and say, oh, you can't break this encryption algorithm. Well, one of the reasons I think cryonics should work is I have a background in cryptography. I don't know if your readers or if your listeners know about it, but I'm Merkle from Merkle trees. And Merkle trees are used in Bitcoin. And I'm the Merkle who invented public key cryptography. So I have some background in cryptography. And one of the reasons I think cryonics should work is that it seems kind of obvious that you can apply cryptanalytic techniques to figuring out what the information is that is your personality. And you can use this information once you've got the information, once you've figured out by appropriate cryptanalytic techniques. By the way, this uses gobs of computer time. So don't get me wrong, it's going to take a huge amount of computer power. I rough out the kind of computer power you might need. And it's a lot.
How much is it? How much do you need?
Well, I ran through the numbers. I mean, if you use the kind of estimates for computer power that Drexler was using, it's well within that. So it's within the kind of computational power we'll get once we have nanotechnology. It's kind of, right now, it's pretty expensive. I think it's borderline with the world's largest computers today. So one person, if you took all the computational power in the world today, maybe kind of, sort of. And then a lot of it, you've got algorithmic development you're going to have to go through. But we're going to have a lot of computer power. I mean, Moore's law has only just begun, really. I mean, seriously, we're going to have a lot of computer power. But to really get that computer power unleashed, we're going to need to develop molecular manufacturing, which means nanofactories. So that's coming. And, you get to debate with a decade or two or a century or however long it is. But it's coming. But once you've got the information, the other thing that people get confused about is you have to upload. Well, no. Once you've got the information, you can use that information to guide the repair process. And the standard repair process is someone who's cryopreserved, they're at low temperature, cryogenic temperatures. So you can now move in with cryobots and you can clear out the circulatory system. So the standard scenario is clear out the circulatory system, enter the person. Once you've cleared out the circulatory system, you have access to everything. You're within 40 microns of everywhere in the body, and I think about 20 microns within the brain because there's better circulation. And once you've got that kind of access, you can now do your first assessment of the damage. If things are going well, if the cryopreservation went well and you've got good circulation of the cryoprotectants, then a lot of the tissue should be in reasonably well cryopreserved shape. Some of it probably won't be. In the areas where there is more damage, you can then do more extensive repair. But in those areas that are in good shape, you maybe don't have to do all that much. You can then repair cracks. One of the things that happens when you're cryopreserved at liquid nitrogen temperature is you do develop cracks, and you'll have to go in and restore those cracks at low temperature. You don't want to warm up if you've cracks. You want to repair the cracks at the low temperature. That probably involves replacing some of the tissue that is close to the cracks or that is between the cracks. Cracks at low temperature are very clean, very precise. So there should not be any information loss. But nonetheless, before you warm things up, you got to repair the cracks. So you go in, and there's some discussion of how to repair cracks and what it might look like. And once you repair the cracks, and once you've repaired some other membrane damage, because you don't want to warm up and have residual membrane damage cause continuing damage in the warmed up person. But once you've repaired some damage that can cause a cascade once you warm up, once you've repaired that, then you can warm up to the point where you have liquid structures. And once you're at liquid temperatures, cold, but liquid, 40 degrees or something. So it's above freezing, but still cold. Then you can initiate sort of what you might call conventional medical nanorobots. And I love saying that, conventional medical nanorobots.
Yeah.
That's another. But at that point, once you've repaired the damage to the membranes, once you've repaired damage to the cracks, so you no longer have that gross level of damage, you can warm things up. And then you can use, like I say, conventional medical nanorobots that are designed to operate in a liquid environment, and they will be able to reverse other damage in the liquid state. Because let's face it, most of the research effort is going to go into keeping people healthy in the conventional sense, because most people will pay for that and there'll be a lot of money going into that. So I expect that what will happen is that there'll be research into how to repair damaged structures that, if warmed, would cause a cascade of problems like cracks or membrane damage where the membrane is ruptured. And then once you warm, then you can repair with medical nanorobots that deal with damage in liquid, the liquid state. And then once you've dealt with that level of damage, then you can warm further to the point where the person is able to wake up. And in the liquid state, you can now repair all the damage that would be relevant to the damage to personality relevant information. You can restore any nerve tissue, any synaptic function, synaptic structures that are not properly functional. And then you warm the person up and they wake up and they say, hey, it worked, I'm alive. And you get to debate how long it's going to be before we have all this technology in place. But pretty clearly, it's going to require a lot of compute power. One of the things that's going on is you put in, at the cryogenic temperature, you put in a communications infrastructure, and you have this honking big computer outside the person, because the honking big computer is going to generate heat. And what you don't want to do is generate heat inside the person, because that would warm them up. So you have this honking big computer outside the person that generates heat as it computes. And then you have a communications infrastructure that goes through the circulatory system and brings the information out.
Yeah.
And then inside the person, you have the communications infrastructure that goes through and carries out the minimum repairs necessary so that they can be warmed up. And that's the sort of the standard scenario.
And how are we going to be able to specifically identify problems at such a small level? I know you said synapses are big and they are compared to nanobots, but how are we going to be able to accurately determine what areas are damaged and what areas are not when there's billions of cells in our bodies?
Take them apart.
In what way do you mean?
Pick up a protein. If you look at there's something called freeze fracture. Freeze fracture involves cleaving a membrane along a lipid bilayer, and then you find that proteins will be, which are embedded in the lipid bilayer, will either be in one half of the freeze fracture, the other half. So in that case, you can simply go down the lipid bilayer and you can pick up a protein from one half of the lipid bilayer, the other half, and then you can just take the protein apart and look at it. Say, hey, this protein is in fine shape or it's in bad shape. And then you can reassemble it and put it back together again. So, I mean, literally, you just take it apart. So if you need to, if you've got an area which is damaged, you just take the area apart. And whether or not you need to take a particular volume apart, or whether you can warm it and deal with it in the liquid state, depends on the level of damage. if the level of damage is significant, you literally take it apart at the cryogenic temperature, and you literally take it apart molecule by molecule. And you say, hey, this is a damaged area. We take it apart and then we put it back together again.
Does that
And if
include,
necessary, yeah, and if someone's been badly cryopreserved, the cryopreservation went badly, you might literally take apart everything.
wow.
Yeah, exactly. And I ran through the
What?
numbers on that. So this is going to be feasible at some point.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I mean, look at it this way. You were built protein
Yeah,
by
yeah.
protein, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at the mitochondria in your body, the mitochondria in your body built every protein in your body. So it's not an out of the way statement to say every protein in your body was manufactured by molecular machines. Biological molecular machines manufactured everything in your body. So what's remarkable about saying we're going to take you apart and put you back together again with molecular machines? I mean, it's not something we can do today, but nothing in the laws of physics says it's impossible.
Yes, exactly.
Nothing even says that it's unreasonable. It's simply outside the scope of our ordinary day-to-day activity. I mean, in 1940, saying we would go to the moon was outside of our ordinary scope of activity, but it was not remarkable, despite a certain editorial in the New York Times in 1920 that said there was no air to push against in space. I loved that editorial. It was so delightful. And it sounded so scientific. There's no air to push against in space, so rockets won't work.
Oh, yeah. Was that, I'm guessing that wasn't written by a physicist, I'd hope.
It was written by the New York Times, and they retracted their editorial after the landing on the moon in 1969.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem,
famous
isn't it?
retraction.
Yeah. It's not a physics problem. Is it more of a technological advancement and engineering problem? And if that's the case, then is it just that we're just ignorant to the genuine potential of this field and other fields? Is that the problem? Is our ignorance?
Well, if you look at the sort of criticisms of cryonics, and the people who are interested in cryonics, I mean, the ones who are seriously interested, are very careful to look at the various criticisms. If you look at the criticisms, you find that they fall into a few categories. One are the criticisms based on it's immoral, people should die. So there's that set of criticisms. Then there are the criticisms from astonishment. These are basically of the form, it can't possibly work because I can't imagine how it could work. And that's sort of the sum total of the argument. I can't imagine it, therefore it can't work. And then the criticisms that attempt to find some scientific basis, and they all fall apart. You know, they say, well, they're quantum phenomena, or there are, indeterminacies, or molecular machines won't work. Thermal noise means it won't work. And if you examine those closely, they just fall apart. They can just are gone. So there are no credible arguments that cryonics is infeasible. They just aren't any. And believe me, if there were any, the folks who are, absolutely filled with, I don't know, they're people who are very emotional. The people who are filled with emotion, and some of them are pretty bright and filled with emotion, would have latched onto them long ago. So
Well, there's a reason why some of the smartest people on Earth are for it and investing their time into it.
Yeah. Well, it's been growing. I mean, I've been fascinated. It's sort of gradually dawned on people that, hey, there are a bunch of people saying this should work, and there aren't any arguments that it won't. And the people who are saying it won't are either saying it's immoral to have a long and healthy life, which is weird, or they're using the argument from, it can't work because it can't, or they're using technically incoherent arguments that don't stand up to the light of day. So, that's pretty much it.
Hmm. And is it almost a marketing or sales problem, the public skepticism? If there were more cryonics companies and maybe some, I know there are some for-profit companies and some growing companies, it is a growing industry, but if the companies were more well-known and bigger, would it actually result in a kind of snowball effect in the sense that they would have more budget to spend on showing people and enlightening people, look, this does work. There's nothing that defies the laws of physics in this. This is a genuine option that could result in your chances of not dying or being revived in a few 100 years or 10 years, 20 years. Is it partially a marketing and sales problem in
Well, I
terms of the
wouldn't call
public
it marketing and
skepticism?
sales. There seems to be some fairly deep-rooted sort of conceptual issues. I talked with a friend of mine, go bicycling with him, and we have long talks about life, death, universe, cryonics, whatever. And for many years, he told me that he was planning on dying on his 90th birthday. That's what he planned on doing, because he just didn't have any experience. I mean, I'd say, hey, why don't you sign up? And he'd say, well, I don't have any, none of my relatives have signed up. I don't have any experience. It's not something that I sort of have an emotional resonance with. How do I deal with this? Everyone in my family sort of has been buried, so I'm going to die at age 90. That's my plan. And this kept up for many years. And then as he got closer to 90, he started saying, well, maybe not at 90. Maybe a little, maybe somewhat after that. And he's still alive and healthy. He's backed off on the bicycling, but he's sort of backed away from he's going to die at 90. He's pushing that out a bit, but he's still, he doesn't have any emotional connection with it. And actually, one of the reasons I think a lot of people are kind of reticent to sign up for cryonics, one of the emotional issues is they're imagining waking up in a future where they don't have any friends, they don't have any relatives, they're where are they? It's like moving to a whole different country, and they figure they'll be alone, and they don't like that. And then what's going to happen? There was one person I was talking with who said, look, I don't want to wake up poor. I don't want to wake up with no money. That's a deal breaker for me. If I'm going to wake up in a future and be poor, forget about it. So there are a couple answers to those questions. I mean, obviously, the first answer is I'm in the middle of the cryonics community, and there's a community. So I have a lot of friends in the cryonics community. I'm signed up. My wife is signed up. I got a bunch of people I know. When I wake up, there'll be a bunch of people who are also in the cryonics community. So I'm going to have friends regardless.
Yeah.
And I figure that younger people, a lot of my younger friends are probably going to just flat out survive, maybe not. But certainly the people who are in the cryonics community are going to be there. So I figure a lot of my friends are going to make it. And as far as the money is concerned, there's something called a wealth preservation trust. Cryonics Wealth Preservation Trust, and people are signing up to put some money into a wealth preservation trust. And there's sort of two flavors. There's a flavor where you get to customize it and you put in more money. And you got to have like $500,000 or something to have the customized trust. But then you can do stuff like put your house into it and sell it, or you can put more money into it. And then there's the lower one, which I think more like a few tens of thousands of dollars can go into it. But it's one size fits all, and you don't get to customize it. So but those exist. So, if you want to wake up in the future, by the way, what I love is the power of compound interest.
That's what I was going to say. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Oh, it's wonderful. You know, if you go and talk with people in the investment industry, they say the ones who make lots of money are the people who stick their money into a total stock market index fund and forget about it.
Yeah.
And the best investors are the investors who are, trust funds that they don't even know they've got.
Yeah.
And because they never touch it. Because the ones who lose money are the ones who say, oh, the market, it's going up, it's going up. Oh, it's going down. I have to pull my money out. I have to put it in cash. Oh, I have to do this. I have to do that. No, 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 no. You just stick it in the index funds. You forget about it. And you come back 30, 40 years later and, hey, it's grown.
Yeah.
So that's what you want to do. So the obvious thing to do is set up a trust. And Alcor has a model trust. If you're a member, you can say, hey, send me a copy of the model trust, and you can get a copy of the model trust. Or you can sign up and you can customize the model trust. Or you can get the lower cost version where you just throw in a few tens of thousands. And you can set up one of these things and you'll wake up with some money. Or at least that's the plan. I mean, how do I phrase it? The legal structure for waking up after you've been declared legally dead and saying, hey, guess what? I'm not legally dead. I want my money back. I mean, there are various ways in which we're trying to arrange so that this all works. But, this has not gone through the courts. Let's put it that way. It has not been tried and tested because, we're doing this for the first time. But, hopefully it works. It should work. I mean, it looks like it should work, but we'll see. At any rate, we're doing that. And then the other thing is, if you sign up, hey, sign up with some friends. You got a choice. You can either sign up with some friends, or you can make some friends in the Cryonics community. And then, hey, when you wake up, you'll have friends in the Cryonics community, either by getting your friends to sign up or by making friends in the Cryonics community. So that's a big one. No, I mean, people tend to like having friends. People are social animals. So having friends is a big deal.
Yeah, but it's not like you wake up and then the one ability that you lose is the ability to make friends. Like, if all goes well, you're still going to have the opportunities to meet more people and meet new friends and find your great grandson or something.
That's what a lot of people say. If I wake up and I'm alive and I'm able to make friends, and hey, it's better than the alternative.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who just say, hey, being alive is good. I want more, it's a good deal. It's definitely better than the alternative.
100%. And if you wake up and you were cryopreserved when you were, say, 90, what's your theory on how much age can be reversed, or if any age can be reversed, assuming that if the technology's got to the point where you can be revived successfully, would that indicate that there's also a chance of your age being reversed as well, so you won't be stuck in your 90-year-old body and mind?
Well, once you're able to reverse cryopreservation, you've got to have a pretty spectacular technology. So pretty much by definition, A, you've got to have the technology to restore you to good health. And B, why would someone revive you if you're going to be old and decrepit? Why not wait, another decade or two till you got the technology that can make you healthy? So there are sort of two questions there. How can you have a technology that can revive you in good health, but can't restore you to a youthful health? That, it's hard to imagine that technology. And B, why would someone revive you and you're in bad health?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense, because why not just leave you cryopreserved for another decade or two until they've ironed out the wrinkles in the process to the point where you can be revived in good health? Because that's pretty much the whole purpose of the thing. So that would be sort of the two answers. But the kind of technology we're looking at, the kind of medical technology we're looking at, would be able to reverse aging as part and parcel of the process. So you'd be able to stay healthy. So,
And you said your younger friends might. Did you say they might not even need to be cryopreserved? Is that your prediction, or do you think they still will need to be?
predictions are difficult, especially about the future.
Of course, yeah.
So I'm a little bit cautious about that. The younger you are, the higher the probability that you might not need to be cryopreserved. On the other hand, you know, back in the 1980s, when I started paying attention to this stuff, there were a bunch of people saying, oh, we're going to reverse aging in the next decade. Oh, we're going to reverse aging in the next decade. And every decade since, people have been saying, oh, we're going to reverse aging in the next decade. So, you know, I'd like to think that we're going to reverse aging in the next decade. At the same time, I think it's probably a good idea to make sure that you sign up with, you know, Alcor. Make sure you're prepared, because there is some risk of mortality. This year, you've got a risk of mortality. Everyone listening has a risk of mortality this year. And if you're comfortable without dealing with that risk, if you're comfortable sticking your head in the sand, okay. But you do have a risk of mortality this year. And if you aren't signed up, you're not dealing with that risk. And if your number comes up, sorry. And I've had friends who were thinking about signing up. Yeah, they're going to sign up. Any day now, they're going to sign up. And then, oops, they're not able to sign up anymore. So that happens. Yeah. And then they didn't make it. So, you know, the sooner you sign up, the sooner you've mitigated that risk. And every year by year, you are taking a risk.
Yeah. And how much is it to sign up as a young person? Maybe monthly. I know there's a fee. Is it what you pay for? You have like 200,000 or something once you die. But how much is it to sign up?
So there's whole body and there's neuro. Whole body is, I think it's 220,000 at this point, and neuro is 80, and it's paid for with life insurance. So basically, if you're young, get the life insurance and then sign up. So that's the right way to do it. And I would basically say anyone who's listening, just go to the Alcor website, check it out, see what the prices are, and then ask yourself, do I want to cover the risk that I face in the next several years, or do I want to, you know, go naked? You can do either one, but, you know, there is a risk. And if you want to live a long, healthy life, then a lot of people who are involved in life extension don't cover the obvious risk, which is that if something bad happens in the next, you know, 5 or 10 years before all these wonderful life extension technologies kick in, then you might not make it. So if you want to cover that risk, sign up.
Yeah, and
it's that simple.
I didn't realize. Yeah. I didn't realize it was you get life insurance separately to Alcor. I thought it was you just pay monthly to Alcor. How come it's not? How come it's a separate thing from Alcor?
There's this big industry called life insurance, and they already do it. And for Alcor to step into that business would be for Alcor to take on an additional bureaucratic overhead that, hey, why would we start doing that when we have, you know, enough work doing our core business? Stick to your knitting. I mean, you know, there's always a possibility that we'll sort of enter that business at some point. But right now, it looks like the simplest thing is, hey, there's this industry called life insurance, and they take care of all of that.
Mhm.
So why walk into that as a whole new business if it's already dealt with? And then we just say, you can do it. The other advantage of that is that if you sign up for a life insurance policy, you can redirect it to whatever organization you want. And people seem to like that. They can sign up with Alcor and they can direct the policy to Alcor. And then, if 10 years from now, things change and they want to do something else with their life insurance policy, whatever it might be, they can redirect the life insurance policy.
Yeah. And
So
do you have to state that you want to get cryopreserved on your life insurance policy when you're signing up? Do you have to
I
write
don't
that
think
down?
so. I don't
Oh,
actually know the details. We got our life insurance policy so long ago that I forget. We didn't have to.
yeah.
We didn't do it back then. We just got a life insurance policy. And they
Yeah.
said, fine, it's a life insurance policy. I think we had a 2-year exclusion period. So if
Yeah.
we try to defraud the life insurance company, or we have, something that's not right, after 2 years or something, it didn't matter what we said. It was just, we had life insurance. But
Yeah.
I don't recall ever saying anything about
Mm.
we were signing up for Cryonics.
Yeah. And then how does the life insurance work? I'm very um, ignorant to life insurance as a 20-year-old. So does the money from you put into the life insurance then pay for Alcor cryopreservation? How does it work?
So basically, you sign up for a life insurance policy, and then when you suffer legal death, it's another advantage of being legally dead is a life insurance policy pays off. If you're not legally dead, then the life insurance policy wouldn't have to pay off.
Mm.
So when the life insurance policy pays off, then Alcor receives the funding from the life insurance policy. And then Alcor takes the money and says, oh, we now have a pot of money. And that pot of money is then divided basically into 2 pots. There's some other divisions that go on that aren't particularly relevant. But the basic pots are, one pot goes into the patient care trust fund. And the patient care trust fund is the money that looks after you once you're sitting in a dewar of liquid nitrogen. And the other pot of money is, oh, you have to have upfront procedures to be cryopreserved. And the upfront money looks after, the surgical procedure, getting you from wherever you are to Alcor, looking after all of the issues that crop up, paying for a bunch of stuff that's related to, restocking supplies and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is there are dues. So there are dues, and I forget the exact annual price tag of dues, 600, 700, 800 bucks a year, something like that. Sorry, I've forgotten the exact number on that one.
That's all
But
right.
basically, it's the life insurance policy that's a big one. And then you pay for the life insurance policy at whatever rate the life insurance company calls for. And I think right now we're recommending whole life. And the basic idea is that you pay for the life insurance policy, and eventually at some point you're fully paid up. And once you're fully paid up, then hey, you're fully paid up and that's it. And you're done paying for the life insurance policy. Now you can get term insurance. The problem with term insurance is you pay for the risk that you might die this year, and that's all you pay for. And then if you reach the age of, 60 or 70, the term insurance keeps going up in price every year. Eventually, at some point, it just gets too expensive. So eventually you're priced out. So whole life has a somewhat higher price tag to begin with, but it generally holds level for the duration of your policy. And it's a combination of covering the risk that you might die this year, plus a savings plan. And eventually, at some point, you've saved up enough money that the payment is there and the premiums no longer accumulate.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Thank you for
So that's
clarifying it with me.
that's
I
the
didn't
general outline.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a few ending questions, The first one is, if you could give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
20-year-old self. Geez. I mean, other than signing up with Alcor, it's hard to say exactly what it would be. Enjoy life, have fun, have a good time. There's plenty of stuff going on. I mean, basically, I've been spending I mean, there's some specific technical advice I'd provide as to what areas of research to pursue. And of course, there's the ever popular invest in Microsoft or Bitcoin or whatever.
Yeah.
So, there's those areas of advice. But generally, the kind of advice would be specific strategies for living and specific strategies for financial investments and decisions to stay healthy and alive.
Yeah. And what's one truth most people disagree with you on?
Disagree with me on? I don't know. Who would disagree with me on anything? Obviously, I'm correct. I guess the thing that I'm interested in is staying alive. I want to be alive in the future. And I've found that most people don't care. Most people regard being alive in the future as irrelevant.
Wow.
And I tend to be drawn to groups where being alive in the future is a good thing. So maybe I don't notice it as much. But I think the vast majority of people really don't worry about what's going to happen in the future. They sort of live day to day. And I tend to pay attention to what's going to be happening, in future decades. What's the long-term future look like? So I pay attention to that, and then that gives me a different perspective on things. Things like, hey, being alive is good, and oh, this cryonics thing, it would be able to keep me alive for a long time. I think I'll pay attention to that. But even before I got involved in that, I was thinking about long-term planning. Things like, oh, I've got, I'm married, I've got a house, I've got a career, things are going well. What's the next big thing that happens in life? Oh, gee, gosh, I have an uneventful career until I'm no longer here. Can I do something about that? I mean, that was sort of indicative of my interest in thinking about the future, which is unusual.
Surprisingly.
Yeah. And you find that that's unusual even in sort of large organizations that you would think would care about the future.
Why is that the case? Is that just human nature, and maybe a almost what would be the word? Ignorance to death? Not ignorance to death. Avoidance of even thinking about the possibility of death.
Well, there are two risks. If you think about the future, it's difficult to make statements about the future that are actionable. And if you think about the future, it's easy to get it wrong. So if you look at people who say they're thinking about the future or they're doing things for the future, they're saying, oh, I want to do this because of some future issue. When you look at them closely, you find they've got it wrong. And you analyze what they're doing. You oftentimes find they say they're doing it for the future, but in fact, they're really doing it for some other reason. In other words, they have an emotional driver, which is causing them to take the action. And then they ascribe their reasons to some long-term issue or some long-term worthy goal. And that's common in human beings. People always say that they are doing things for wonderful, aspirational goals. I don't know if staying alive is a wonderful, aspirational goal. I just sort of think that, hey, I thought about it, and you know, you could just sort of say, well, phooey on it, I'm gonna not worry about staying alive. I'll just go along and die. But I just couldn't. I mean, I thought about it and said, you know, I'd rather live. Um,
Yeah.
I enjoy living, so why not have more of it? Um, and that that would be true even in the future. But mostly when people talk about their long-term goals and their long-term visions, they're not really talking about long-term goals and long-term visions. They're talking about their emotional predispositions, and then they're clothing them in something which sounds better and more grand.
Mhm.
Mostly people are just having fun in the short term, which is fine. I mean, what's wrong with having fun?
Yeah. Do you have an example of that emotional predisposition being clothed to something else in terms of future aspiration?
Pick anything that anybody does and then look at what they're doing more closely. And 9 times out of 10, it's for shorter term reasons. I mean, a lot of people talk about how they want to, I don't know, pick some grand and glorious thing, save the environment, um, save, work for the arts, improve the, help the poor, you know, pick anything.
Yeah.
And you find that people are doing it for reasons that are not as noble as they would want you to
Mm,
believe.
mm,
Uh, so
yeah. Virtue
you
signaling
know,
is one hell of a thing.
yeah.
Is it?
It really is.
Yeah. I think trying to live longer is probably one of the most aspirational goals to have. You said it might not be that aspirational to other people, but I definitely agree with you. And the worst part of it is when people virtue signal and then make you feel guilty for also not pretending to care about that particular topic, which is quite common, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Well, I know in my case, I'm actually somewhat guilty of the same thing. I enjoy talking, right? So it probably comes through as I chat with you about things. So I enjoy talking about it. It's also the case, though, that in cryonics, obviously, for cryonics to work, you need a community.
Mm,
Cryonics doesn't work unless there are people who are looking after your doer when you're in the doer. So there needs to be a community, and there needs to be a community that sort of understands that it is a good thing to have a community. So to some extent, it's completely self-serving on my part to go around talking about how useful cryonics it is and how valuable it is
mm,
and why it is that it's a good thing to have a community, why you should explain to your relatives that cryonics is a good idea, and why you should form friendships in the cryonics community. Uh,
mm.
because that's all part and parcel of creating a community that will persist and keep lovable me cryopreserved, and also
Yeah.
everyone else involved in this grand and glorious experiment. But it's also true that I like talking. So, you know, I find myself talking with people, explaining what a wonderful idea cryonics is, and then I have these pleasant and enjoyable conversations. So, okay, I plead guilty. I am enjoying myself. What can I say? Uh, I have this weak spot for speaking,
Yeah.
but there
Well,
actually is some utility in it towards the grand aspirational goal. At
of
least
course.
that's what I
Yeah.
tell myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, you could be talking and vouching for a much worse thing, so it's not like it's destructive to anyone or yourself. So,
Exactly, and it
I guess
actually
it's
helps.
yeah, exactly. And is it that I get it is the more people that sign up for it, the higher chance of it persisting in the future. That's
Yes, exactly.
evident, isn't it? So you're going to
The
have
larger
that.
the group, especially in a democracy, the larger the group, the higher the probability that group will be able to carry out its goals and missions, whether it's because people in that group vote and therefore the legal system and the democratic system will recognize them more easily, or whether it's because the more people you have, the more financial resources that group will have. So more research will be carried out, more recognition in a variety of ways. The fact that if you have more people, you'll have, well, something pragmatic, like we'll have more members in the DART team. So there'll be more people able to go out and get you if you suffer legal death. So the more team members, more people able to cryopreserve you in more places. All of the usual advantages of size.
Yeah.
So,
And what's one thing you want the audience to remember about cryopreservation and nanotechnology? What's the one thing?
it's coming. It's going to happen. So, don't worry about the fact that it's coming. I don't know exactly when it's going to happen. So a lot of people say it's going to happen this year, next year, 10 years, 20 years. They point at straight lines in semi-log paper. That's one of the things I do, and say, well, I don't know exactly when it's happening, but these straight lines on semi-log paper are suggestive. I don't actually know. It's always difficult to say exactly when, but it is coming. And just hang in there.
Yeah. And what would it look like when it happens? What will change when it happens? What will be the happening?
The simplest way to explain it is that everyone will be wealthy. In other words, we've been seeing the standard of living go up, 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 up
Yep.
over time. Once you have a manufacturing technology, which is at its core a replicating manufacturing base. So you have manufacturing systems that can make more replicating manufacturing systems. Once you have a replicating manufacturing base, manufacturing costs go down. And we've seen that in the computer industry. The cost of computers has been going down. Now imagine that happening to everything. All manufactured products get cheaper, just like computers get cheaper. Everything gets less expensive, which means all material objects get cheaper. So any manufactured product you can think of, cars, houses, anything, it all gets cheaper. Whatever you want, if you go boating gets cheaper. Boats are cheaper. Boats are less expensive and better. Airplanes get cheaper. Whatever you're interested in, it gets cheaper. And it gets better. So to first approximation, everyone gets wealthy, at least in terms of material possessions.
So the molecular revolution is coming, right?
It's coming. Hang on. Don't get uptight. Don't get distracted with these petty fights. I mean, we're gonna see a lot of stuff. Make sure you don't get caught up in the petty fights. Don't get caught up in the day-to-day. I want to get in a fight with that guy, and keep the peace. Keep moving forward, and hang in there. Stay alive. Stay healthy. And it's coming. And sign up with Alcor.
Yes. That's a great way to end it. Ralph Merkle, ladies and gentlemen. Ralph, I've really enjoyed this and really enjoyed your takes and sense of wit, sense of humor as well in it as well. It's made it a really interesting conversation. And so what are you currently working on?
Oh, well, let's see. We've got a paper we came out with recently on a molecular field effect transistor. The computer revolution is moving towards smaller and smaller transistors. And the question is, where do we go? And the smallest field effect transistor would be molecular in size. And we designed and analyzed a molecular field effect transistor that's got a little over 7,000 atoms in it, which seems pretty small. So we analyzed that, we published it. It's up on arXiv at this point, and it's also up at IMM. By the way, if people are interested, they can see the papers we've been putting up at imm.org and click on publications. imm.org.
I'll leave in the show notes.
Yep. And then everyone knows Alcor. Alcor.org is where Alcor is. So if you want to find out how to sign up, just click on the website.
And do you have a personal website as well?
Yeah, ralphmerkle.com.
Yeah, thought so, yeah. Yeah, I'll leave that in the show notes as well.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ralph. And I hope the
Thank
audience enjoyed it as much as I did. And yeah, everyone go sign up for Alcor and start doing some research on this incredible, incredible field. If you want to start your own podcast but have no idea where to start, and you want to generate viral social media clips and get your dream guests onto your show, even from just using your laptop in your bedroom like I did, then my Pro Remote Podcast Blueprint is exactly for you. It is a private paid course and community that has every single step and process I've used and continue to use to grow this show. And I include every single secret, every single tactic I do and still use that will get you results super fast. And also, if you want to access me personally every single week, then as part of this course, you'll also be able to join live weekly calls where I go through your podcast and answer your questions to get you results much, much faster. So if you want to actually start a podcast and stop dreaming and get millions of social media views and book your dream guests in half the amount of time it took me, then click the first link in the description.